On my 18th birthday, my grandpa gave me a gift that felt like a dream come true, a generous amount of money to invest in my business. It wasn't just cash, it was his way of saying he believed in me and my ideas. What would you do if your biggest battle wasn't with strangers, but with your own family? Could you walk away to save yourself, even if it meant losing everything? This is a story about betrayal, tough choices, and finding strength when the odds are stacked against you. Stick around to see how one person turned heartbreak into triumph. And if it grabs your attention, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. I had always wanted to start a business designing custom stationery and office supplies. From personalized planners to branded office kits, I wanted to create items that made workspaces feel special. I fell in love with the idea during 2020, a time when life had slowed down and I found myself diving deep into graphic design and running a small online store. It wasn't much, but it lit a fire in me. I could see the potential, especially for small businesses looking for affordable, customized products. I had already sketched out a plan, researched suppliers, and created sample designs. Grandpa's gift was the missing piece I needed to turn my passion into something real, something I could build a future on. But then, everything unraveled. My brother, who was 31 at the time, had been unemployed for nearly 2 years. He never seemed to stick with the job, mostly because he couldn't follow rules. He'd either sleep through his shifts or just not show up without letting anyone know. He had also dropped out of college, and his life seemed like one string of bad decisions after another. Despite all of this, my parents supported him unconditionally. They paid his bills, bought him things, and gave him a roof over his head without expecting anything in return. At 26, he was still living like a teenager, free of responsibility, while my parents cleaned up his messes. They always said he was just in a rough patch and would figure it out eventually, but I wasn't so sure. This rough patch had been dragging on since he was 16. Watching him waste every opportunity was frustrating, but what could I do? My parents refused to see it for what it was. When they found out about my birthday gift, everything changed. Suddenly, their focus shifted to me. They began pressuring me to loan my brother the entire amount. According to them, he was drowning in bills and on the verge of being evicted. At first, I said no. It wasn't easy, though. They made me feel like the worst person in the world, calling me selfish and reminding me that family is supposed to help each other. Their guilt tripping was relentless, and eventually, it wore me down. I gave in, not because I thought it was the right thing to do, but because I couldn't carry the weight of their accusations any longer. I told myself it was temporary, that my brother would pay me back soon, and I'd still have time to bring my dream to life. But deep down, I wasn't so sure. The next morning, I woke up trying to convince myself I had done something good by helping my brother. Maybe this sacrifice would bring some kind of peace to our family. But before I could even settle into that thought, my parents blindsided me with another demand. They told me I needed to start paying $2,000 in rent, effective immediately. Turning 18, they said, meant I had to contribute to the household. It didn't matter that I was still in school, unemployed, and had just handed over every penny of my startup fund to help my brother. It felt like a slap in the face. I'd done what they wanted, put my dreams on hold for their sake, and now I was being punished for it. That's when the truth hit me like a freight train. My parents didn't care about my goals or dreams. To them, I wasn't their child with hopes and ambitions. I was just a solution to my brother's never-ending problems. I felt used and discarded, like my aspirations had never mattered. That week, I packed up my belongings and left. I knew I couldn't keep living in a place where I was nothing more than a backup plan. I decided to go no contact NC with my parents and brother. It was one of the hardest choices I ever made, but deep down, I knew it was the right one. The years that followed weren't easy. I juggled college, worked odd jobs, and slowly began rebuilding my business from scratch. I poured every ounce of energy into designing logos, planners, office kits, and anything I could create to build my brand. Bit by bit, I started attracting small businesses that needed custom products. Before I knew it, things began to take off. By the end of the second year, I opened my first small store. By year 5, I had 2 thriving locations and a strong online presence. My dream wasn't just alive, it was flourishing. Then, out of nowhere, my parents reached out. I hadn't spoken to them in years, so seeing their message left me stunned. They were vague at first, saying they needed to talk urgently. Eventually, they confessed my brother was in serious trouble. They didn't give me all the details, but from what they said, his life had spiraled completely out of control. They hinted at gambling debts, another failed business venture, and even the possibility of illegal activity. They were desperate, and it showed. What caught me off guard was their offer. They'd pay me back double the amount I had loaned him years ago if I agreed to help him. But this wasn't just about money. They wanted me to leverage my business connections to find him a way out. They thought I could use my partnerships and reputation to help him land a job or smooth over whatever mess he'd gotten himself into. It was a lot to take in. The brother who had once been the center of all their attention and support was now their biggest regret. And they were coming to me to clean it up. I couldn't believe it. After everything they put me through, they had the audacity to come back and ask for more. Not once had they reached out to congratulate me on my success, ask how I was doing, or even acknowledge my achievements. The only reason they were contacting me now was because they wanted me to fix my brother's mess. Again. At first, I felt furious. But underneath the anger, there was sadness too. It was like nothing had changed. My parents still only cared about my brother, and I was still just a tool to be used when things got bad. I sat with the thought for a while, really letting it sink in. Could I help my brother? The truth was, yes, I could. With the connections I had built in my industry, I could have probably found him a job or helped him in some way. But the more I thought about it, the angrier I became. They didn't reach out to see how I was doing. They didn't ask if I was okay or if I even wanted to help. And my brother, he didn't bother to contact me himself. Not once had he apologized for what he did or acknowledged the damage he caused when he took the money meant for my business. Instead, he sent my parents to do the asking, like he couldn't even face me. I realized that stepping in now would only mean setting myself on fire to keep them warm. They hadn't changed. They still saw me as nothing more than a backup plan for my brother's failures, and I wasn't about to let history repeat itself. So I said no. I told them I wouldn't sacrifice what I had worked so hard to build just to clean up my brother's mistakes. He made his choices, and it was his responsibility to face the consequences, not mine. Of course, they tried to guilt trip me again. They talked about family and how I was in a good place now so I could afford to help. But this time, I stood my ground. I've worked too hard, overcome too much, and given up too many dreams to let them drag me back into their chaos. I don't owe them anything, especially not after the way they treated me. It's been a week since I told them no, and I haven't heard from them since. At first, I felt relieved, like I'd finally reclaimed control of my life. But as the silence stretched on, guilt began creeping in. Part of me wonders if I should have helped. My brother is still family, and no matter how much they hurt me, that part of me hasn't disappeared. I told myself I wouldn't let their guilt tactics work on me, but now I'm questioning everything. Am I doing the right thing? Or am I being petty, holding on to something that happened 5 years ago? I feel like I'm going crazy trying to figure it out. Update 1. Hey everyone. I'm back with an update. It's been 3 weeks since my last post, and I've had some time to think things through. First off, I just want to say how much I appreciate all the responses, even the ones that didn't agree with me. Reading through your thoughts gave me a lot to think about, and I realized some of you raised important questions. Let me address those before I dive into the latest developments. Some of you asked whether my parents specifically asked me for money when they reached out. No, they didn't come right out and ask for cash. What they wanted was for me to use my business connections to help my brother. From what I've gathered, his problems run a lot deeper than just financial debt. My parents were vague about the specifics, but it sounds like my brother is entangled in something far too big to fix with money alone. They seem to believe that my network in the business world could somehow pull him out of this mess. But honestly, I see it for what it is. Just another way to drag me back into his chaos. Others asked if I felt guilty about cutting contact with my family years ago, or if I ever missed my brother. I'd be lying if I said it wasn't hard. At first, there were times I felt terrible, wondering if walking away made me a bad person. But as time went on, I realized staying in contact would have only enabled their behavior. As for missing my brother, no, I don't. Our relationship was always one-sided. I was the one giving, and he was always taking. It was never an equal connection. A lot of you also wanted to know why I gave my brother the money in the first place. I know it was a mistake, and looking back, I regret it deeply. But you have to understand, I was only 18, still in high school, and living under my parents' roof. From the moment they found out about the money, they never let up. To this day, I have no idea how they even knew Grandpa gave it to me. But every waking moment, they pressured me. Morning to night, all they talked about was how I needed to help my brother. They guilted me relentlessly, pulling every emotional string they could. In the end, I gave in. I kept a small portion of the money for myself, but the rest went to my brother. It wasn't because I thought it was right. It was because I couldn't take the pressure anymore. Now, on to what happened recently. After my parents reached out to ask for help, they went completely silent for about a week. I figured they had given up on me and found someone else to bail my brother out. But then, out of the blue, they invited me to dinner to talk things through. I was torn. Part of me thought maybe sitting down with them would bring closure. Maybe facing them in person would finally put this chapter behind me. But another part of me knew it was probably just another guilt trip waiting to happen. In the end, I decided to go. Not because I wanted to help, but because I needed to see for myself if anything had truly changed. Spoiler alert, it hadn't. The dinner was at a local restaurant, which immediately felt odd. My parents almost always insisted on hosting things at home, so this change of venue set a strange tone right away. When I arrived, they were already seated, smiling like they were genuinely happy to see me. The whole vibe felt off, forced, like they were trying too hard to act normal. At first, things were civil. We exchanged polite small talk, and for a brief moment, I started to think maybe, just maybe, they were trying to reconnect without an agenda. But that hope quickly disappeared. Halfway through dinner, the real reason for the invitation came up. They didn't ask for money outright, but they still wanted me to use my success to help my brother. Specifically, they thought I could leverage my business connections, my network of investors, and contacts in the financial world to straighten things out for him. It wasn't a direct plea for cash, but it was still a favor I had no interest in getting involved in. As they spoke, I felt the all too familiar knot forming in my stomach, the same feeling I'd had when they pressured me to give my brother the loan all those years ago. And just when I thought the conversation couldn't get any worse, my brother showed up. They hadn't mentioned he'd be joining us. He just strolled in looking smug and self-assured, as if he owned the place. From the moment he sat down, it was clear nothing about him had changed. He was loud, arrogant, and completely unapologetic about the mess he'd made of his life. It was as if he expected me to roll out the red carpet and fix everything for him. Worse, he acted like I owed him. At one point, he had the audacity to suggest that because I'd been so lucky with my business, it was only fair for me to help him out. He even framed it like I should feel grateful for the opportunity to do something good for him. And then he dropped the most infuriating comment of the night. He insinuated that my business wouldn't have succeeded if I hadn't given him that loan back then. He genuinely believed that his failures had somehow contributed to my success. Can you believe that? It took everything in me not to get up and walk out right then and there. But I stayed, if only to let this whole charade play out. That dinner was the final nail in the coffin for me. Nothing had changed. My parents were still enabling him, bending over backward to shield him from the consequences of his actions. And my brother? He was still the same entitled, selfish person he'd always been. They're not looking for help because they care about me or respect everything I've achieved. To them, I'm just a quick solution to a problem they don't want to handle themselves. After that disastrous dinner, I went straight home and blocked their numbers. I thought I'd feel guilty. I thought the weight of cutting them off would crush me. But instead, I felt relieved. For the first time in what feels like forever, I know I've made the right decision. So, this is where things stand now. I've cut them off for good, and I'm finally at peace with my choice. I know some people might say I'm being harsh, but I've learned the hard way that setting boundaries, even with family, isn't just important, it's necessary. For the first time, I'm putting myself first, and it feels like a breath of fresh air. I'll share another update if anything changes, but for now, I'm moving forward with my life. Thank you to everyone who gave advice and support. It helped me see things more clearly. Update 2. It's been 6 months since my last update, and I thought I'd close the chapter on this whole ordeal. But apparently, my family isn't ready to let go. After I blocked my parents, I started getting bombarded with messages from extended family, some aunts, uncles, and cousins I barely even talked to. They accused me of being cold and heartless, abandoning my brother when he needed me the most. Some even went as far as to claim I'd forgotten where I came from, now that I found success. The irony wasn't lost on me. None of these people were stepping up to help him themselves. They had plenty of opinions about my actions, though. At first, I ignored their messages, telling myself they didn't deserve a response. But as the days passed, that familiar guilt started creeping back in. What if his situation was worse than I thought? What if I was being too harsh? Eventually, I unblocked my parents to get some clarity. I wish I hadn't. The moment I reached out, the truth hit me like a ton of bricks. My brother's debt wasn't just bad, it was catastrophic. He owed over $90,000. Most of it was from gambling, but there were also shady personal loans involved. When they told me the amount, I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. This wasn't a string of bad luck or a mistake that spiraled out of control. This was a disaster of his own making. And he'd chosen to dig the hole deeper with every decision. And then I learned the most infuriating part. The money I gave him on my 18th birthday, the money my parents guilted me into handing over, was never used to pay rent. Not a single penny. Instead, he gambled it away in a desperate attempt to fund some half-baked business scheme. All this time, I'd told myself that at least the money had helped him stay afloat. But no, he blew it. Every last dollar. Hearing that only made me angrier. How could he take what was supposed to be my future and throw it away like that? Of course, my parents tried to downplay it. They acted like it was no big deal, as if his intentions somehow justified the mess he'd made. But all I could think about was the years of sacrifice, hard work, and sleepless nights I'd endured to rebuild what he'd so easily destroyed. They kept saying everyone makes mistakes and family should stick together, but I wasn't buying it. I reminded them that they had promised to give him double the original loan if I helped. Why couldn't they use that to pay off some of his debt? That's when even more truth came out. They admitted they never had the money in the first place. It was all just a ploy to manipulate me into stepping in, either with my own cash or by leveraging my business connections. What they really wanted was for me to find him a high-paying job in my network so he could slowly pay off his debts. I was furious. Not only had they lied to me, but they were also once again trying to shift the responsibility of fixing his mess onto my shoulders. Of course, I refused to help, and they didn't take it well. They called me selfish and accused me of forgetting the importance of family. When I stood firm, they started reaching out to other relatives, twisting the story to paint me as the bad guy. Suddenly, I was bombarded with messages from cousins saying things like, "You're successful now, it wouldn't hurt you to help out. He's your brother. Aren't you ashamed to abandon him like this?" It was exhausting. That's when I realized I needed to set some serious boundaries, not just with my parents, but with the entire family. I responded to the relatives who reached out, saying something along the lines of, "If you're so concerned about my brother, why don't you step up and help him?" And just like that, the messages stopped. They didn't have anything to say, which only confirmed what I already knew. They weren't interested in helping my brother. They just wanted to guilt me into doing it. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. I kept replaying everything in my head, from how they forced me to give up my savings at 18 to how they demanded rent from me the very next day. That's when it hit me. The only reason they wanted me to pay rent back then was probably to funnel even more money to my brother. They had been using me as just another source of cash to support his reckless lifestyle. I wish things could have been different with my parents and brother, but I finally accepted that some relationships can't be fixed. If they ever truly want to reconnect with me, it'll have to come from a place of respect and accountability, not manipulation. But for now, I'm done. I'm not going to let guilt or family pressure drag me back into a toxic situation. Thanks again to everyone who commented and shared advice. Your support has been a lifeline, helping me stay strong throughout this mess. I'll post another update if anything major happens, but for now, I'm moving forward and not looking back. Update 3. It's been a good while since my last update, and somehow things have gone from bad to worse. I genuinely thought I had reached the end of this mess after blocking my parents and brother again, but apparently they weren't done dragging me into their chaos. This time, they've escalated things in the most absurd way imaginable. They're now threatening to take legal action against me. Yep, you read that right. My parents are threatening to sue me for ruining the family. To give you some context, I recently learned that my brother's financial situation has become even more catastrophic. Honestly, I didn't think that was possible, given how desperate my parents had been about getting me to help him. Apparently, he's now in serious debt with loan sharks. This isn't just credit card debt or overdue bills. According to some mutual contacts, he owes tens of thousands of dollars to dangerous people, the kind who don't send polite reminders for payment. My parents are panicking, but instead of holding my brother accountable, they've somehow decided this is all my fault. They managed to get another number and started texting me again. The messages are ridiculous and repetitive, accusing me of turning my back on the family and claiming I've abandoned them in their time of need. I ignored the texts, so now they've escalated to sending legal threats. Their messages claim they're considering suing me for emotional damages because I've broken the family bond and caused them immense stress. At first, I thought they were bluffing. It sounded completely absurd. I mean, what judge would actually look at this situation and think, yes, your adult daughter is responsible for your gambling son's debts and your stress? But as the messages kept coming, I started feeling uneasy. What if they really did try to drag me into court just to make my life harder? I decided it was time to consult a lawyer just to cover my bases. Thankfully, the lawyer reassured me I had absolutely nothing to worry about. They explained that my parents and brother have no legal basis to sue me. I'm not financially responsible for my brother's poor choices, and emotional damages in cases like this are rarely taken seriously, especially when I've had no direct involvement with his debt. The lawyer also said I was smart to block them earlier and strongly advised me to do it again. They suggested I block any new numbers or accounts my parents or brother might use to contact me. They also recommended that I keep a record of all the messages and calls I've received just in case I ever need to use them as evidence of harassment. Hearing this advice was a huge relief. It gave me the clarity and confidence to stand firm. Knowing that I was legally in the clear was a huge relief, but the entire situation still left me feeling sick. It's hard to describe just how exhausting this has been. No matter how many boundaries I set, my parents always seem to find new ways to drag me back into their chaos. The entitlement is mind-blowing. They genuinely think it's reasonable to blame me, someone they've mistreated for years, for my brother's reckless choices. It's like they can't even begin to comprehend that he's responsible for his own actions. What hurts the most is that instead of trying to make things right, my parents have doubled down on manipulation and threats. They could have held my brother accountable or let him figure things out on his own, but no. In their eyes, it's easier to scapegoat me than face reality. I feel angry, frustrated, and drained. I keep asking myself how things got to this point, but deep down, I know the truth. No amount of self-reflection will change who they are. This is who they've always been. People who expect me to fix their problems without ever offering anything in return. That's a reality I've had to accept. I'm not sure if there will be another update. Honestly, I hope this is the end of it. But if anything major happens, I'll let you all know. For now, I'm closing this chapter and focusing on moving forward. Update 4. It's been about a month since my last update, and as expected, things have taken another turn. Just when I thought I'd heard the worst of it, a mutual friend gave me some alarming news. My brother has now landed himself in legal trouble. This time, it's serious. He's being investigated for fraud. Apparently, in addition to the debt he racked up with loan sharks and failed gambling ventures, he got involved in something shady in a desperate attempt to dig himself out of the hole. From what I've heard, it's linked to some kind of fraudulent scheme he participated in because he thought it was a quick way to make money. Apparently, in addition to the debt he racked up with loan sharks and failed gambling ventures, he got involved in something shady in a desperate attempt to dig himself out of the hole. From what I've heard, it's linked to some kind of fraudulent scheme he participated in because he thought it was a quick way to make money. Now, the police are involved, and there's a real possibility he could be facing jail time if he's convicted. It's mind-boggling how things have spiraled so far out of control. I always knew my brother was irresponsible, but I never thought it would escalate to the point where he's committing crimes. Unfortunately, things are even worse for my parents. They're now facing eviction because of him. Apparently, over the years, they took out multiple loans and refinanced their home to help him. I'm guessing it was to cover his debts and bail him out of trouble. Now that the house is tied up in loans they can't pay back, they're at risk of losing it entirely. It's devastating to hear, but at the same time, it's hard to feel sympathy when this is a mess they created by enabling my brother for so long. They sacrificed their own stability to prop up someone who's proven time and time again that he'll only drag them down. Final update. Now, my parents are so deep in debt that they're on the verge of losing their house. Even though I had blocked them on all platforms, they somehow managed to get a message through a relative. It was more of the same, a last-ditch attempt to get me to step in and help. This time, they didn't directly ask for money. Instead, they wanted me to use my resources and connections to find them a place to stay or help them fight the eviction. I hate that it's come to this for them. No matter what they've done to me, they're still my parents, and I don't wish homelessness on anyone. That said, I can't get involved. I warned them over and over that they were enabling my brother's behavior, but they refused to listen. They chose to sacrifice everything for him, even when they could have stepped back and made him handle his own problems. Now, they're dealing with the consequences of that decision. And as harsh as it sounds, it's not my responsibility to fix it. The fact that they're still trying to drag me into this, despite all the boundaries I've set, just proves that nothing has changed. They haven't learned, and they likely never will. My brother has always been their priority, and they continue to expect me to clean up after him, no matter how deep he's fallen. I still feel sadness for them, of course. It's hard to completely shut off those emotions. I mean, who wouldn't feel sad to hear their parents are about to lose their home? But at the same time, I know helping them now would just pull me back into the same toxic cycle. They would continue to rely on me to solve their problems while never holding my brother accountable for anything. That's not a burden I'm willing to carry, no matter how much they try to guilt me into it. The hardest part has been sticking to my decision to stay out of it. There's always that small voice in my head asking if I'm being too harsh. But then I remind myself that I've done everything I could in the past, and it never made a difference. They've made their choices, and I've made mine. I've also cut off contact with the relative who passed along the message. I know they meant well, but I don't need anyone playing the middleman and trying to guilt me into caving. I've set my boundaries, and I'm sticking to them. For anyone wondering, I've done some digging, and it turns out the fraud investigation against my brother is very serious. The police have been building their case for months, and it doesn't look good for him. Whether or not he faces jail time is still up in the air, but given the circumstances, I wouldn't be surprised if that's where this leads. At this point, it's hard to feel sorry for him, especially because he's had so many chances to turn things around and wasted every single one. I'm going to continue focusing on protecting my mental health and my boundaries. This entire experience has been exhausting, and I think I'm long overdue for a break. Thanks again to everyone who's been supportive throughout this ordeal. This will likely be my final update as I've decided to fully cut ties with everyone involved. I'm moving forward, and I'm at peace with my decision.